Hey guys, Matthew here, and a few weeks ago I made a video on how I made the best elemental bow to ever exist in Path of Exile, including Standard. And in this video, we're actually going to be looking at the best physical bow to ever exist in Path of Exile in a temporary league. Now, unfortunately for us, it's pretty much impossible to have the best physical bow to ever exist in Path of Exile, including Standard, because in Standard, they have access to things like Eternal Orbs and infinite currency, so they can make some pretty ridiculous items. However, we settled for what would be currently, and up until now, in the history of Path of Exile, the best physical bow in a temp league. And we are very, very proud of this craft. Now, you might be wondering why I'm saying we, and that's because there were three main crafters and three main, actors, if you will, when it came to this craft, on top of a bunch of people outside of the main group of three people who also helped a lot and who I have to give my thanks to. But the three main people would be myself, who was a main, I guess you could say, I funded or I paid for more than half of the entirety of the craft, and including buying the base itself. And then there was the main crafter, the person who did the grueling work, known as Phys. I'll link his Twitch in the description. Super helpful guy, as well as super knowledgeable person. He's been playing the game for a very long time. And the final person, which was a bit of an in-between, who helped with a bit of the crafting. He was actually the person who hit one of the final steps of hitting +2 arrows on the bow, as well as the person who divined the prefixes, and that is a man known as zboub, who is not a streamer or anything like that, but still have to give my thanks to him because his work was instrumental into the existence of this item. Now, let's have a look at the item itself. Now, this bow is a T1, T1, T2, +2 arrow with +1 arrow implicit, with proj speed implicit, crit chance, attack speed, spine bow. Now, I'll be talking about a little bit later on in the video the step-by-step guide on this exact item, as well as the reasoning behind some of the choices that we made. But yeah, like I said, a lot of people are probably going to look at it and be like, oh, wait, there's a T2 on there. Wait until you get into the part of the video where I explain how gruesome and grueling the process is to make a physical weapon, and you'll understand why we actually kept T2. And remember what I said, even despite the fact that there's a T2, this is still, to date, the best physical bow that's ever existed in a temp league. So very happy with this craft. But before I go into the actual step-by-step guide, I actually have a bit of a story time for this bow, which is maybe not going to interest every single person, so you feel free to look in the timestamps and skip this entire story time section. But this bow has a very interesting story. So it all begins with me buying the base being the projectile speed +1 arrow on a spine bow item level 86, and this cost me 1 mirror. Now, this was purchased a little over a week ago or something. And this happened because Phys, the guy who actually crafted it, a friend of mine, basically messaged me on Discord and was like, yo, check out this base. And I don't think he had any real idea that I was actually going to go out and buy it, but I did because I knew that I was going to be going into my project of project predicting profitability, which I've been working on, which meant I wasn't going to use any currency. So I had a lot of available currency that I had nothing to do with. So I decided, you know what, I'll buy the bow. So I bought the bow and I gave it to him, and I gave him an extra mirror on top of it. And I told him basically, go have fun, see what you can get done with this currency. And on top of the fact that he being, an advanced player, also had, a pretty good amount of currency available to him. So he starts crafting, and you'll see a little bit later on the step-by-step on how we do this, but eventually he gets to the final step of the prefixes, which is essentially either an aug or a non-Phys to Phys, and this happens. So we're going to be looking at a clip from his stream, because this was all on stream. So, put you guys in context, he goes on TFT, goes into buy order, he's like, want to buy, Augment Phys. Someone messages him in game. He's like, do you still want Aug Phys? He goes, yes. And then, he's just vibing. As you can see, he's vibing. Now, he trades the person. He makes sure that it's, he asks him what's his Discord. He checked the vouchers of the person and realizes, okay, it's an exalted service provider, whatever it is, right? It's somebody I can trust. So he puts the item in trade, and then he accepts the trade. And then he realizes that the other guy is just not accepting. And then he goes, please stop looking at my item. Just take it and do the craft. And then right after that, he says, please don't yoink my item, right? Please don't steal my item. And he probably just said that as a joke. Maybe in the back of his mind, he was actually a little bit worried if that was going to happen. Unfortunately for us, the people who had, spent the currency, spent the time on the bow, especially for him, who's doing by far the hardest part, Photox being the actual, crafting portion of it. The inevitable did happen, and, this guy goes ahead and just leaves the party, puts him on ignore, and he's like, well, thank you for your bow. Now, when this happens, obviously I was in chat because I was invested into the bow, and I go, give me the guy's IGN, give me his account name, and I'm going to go ahead and email GGG. Now, whether GGG would have done anything about the situation, would they have given me back the item because we had, video proof of it happening? We had actual evidence. Obviously, clearly, they can track where the item actually ends up. They have the power to give us back the item. Now, would they have actually given us back the item? It's something that I'll never be able to answer, because fortunately for us, the third person, which had the third actor, if you will, in this whole crafting process is a man known as zboub, and zboub messages the scammer and goes, I'll offer you 100x, you sell me the bow right now. And the scammer, not knowing what the hell he has in his hands, says okay. So he just buys the bow for 100x, and it's right back in our hands. And this happened during the time that I was writing the email to GGG, explaining the situation, clipping the whole scamming portion of it, and all that good stuff. Before I was actually done sending the email, we got the bow back in our hands, so I send them an update, and I'm like, well, we actually managed to get the bow back. However, definitely look into this account. What they're doing is, pretty scummy and whatever. So they actually responded within a few minutes, and they're like, yep, we're going to go ahead and flag this account. If there's more reports that come into it, we'll look into it. Now, I think that's pretty horrible. I think that people who do scams on this sort of level, that are trying this hard to go out of their way to just make other people's experience worse, should definitely be punished on their first offense. But anyways, that's not for me to decide, and I won't go on a rant because, oh, God knows I have a lot to say about the people who do this sort of thing. But fortunately for us, and thanks to zboub, the absolute legend, who's also the person who had the +2 arrows and who divined the bow, we actually got the bow back in our hands. And because of that, Photox was able to keep crafting it, and eventually got to the point where we are right now. So that's pretty much the story time on how this bow came to be. And man, it's crazy that the actual scammer basically accepted 100x, a measly 100x for such an item. It just goes to show that the people who do that sort of thing are basically have absolutely no idea how to play the game, have absolutely no knowledge whatsoever. The base alone is worth over a mirror, or at the very least one mirror. And not only that, it was basically ready to be augmented to be potentially worth many, many, many mirrors. So we got really lucky, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But that's enough for this portion of the video. Let's go into the actual crafting portion, the reason why we made the choices that we made. And it all starts with the base. So which base do you go when crafting a physical bow? Now, historically, that would have been a Harbinger bow. The reason for that is because of the increased critical strike chance of 30 to 50%, which is absolutely massive. However, Harbinger bow has a very slow attack per second of 1.2, which makes it very, very slow. And bow builds don't, actually like slow attack speed. So even if it has a very, very high physical damage on base of 60 to 159, it still makes it a much lesser base for self-attacking. Now, for a build which actually uses something like mines, for example, where they can bypass this horrible attack speed, Harbinger bow would still be good. But for us, because we were going for obviously self-attacking, we went for a very good in-between, which is the spine bow. Now, the spine bow has a pretty decent attack speed. It's not quite as good as, say, a thicket at 1.5, or even an Imperial at 1.45, but it also has a very high critical strike chance base of 6.5% versus the baseline of most other bows, like for example the Thicket at 5%. Because we were going for a physical bow, and physical bows are not going Secrets of Suffering because they are going converted to cold, therefore almost entirely cold damage based via scaling Hatred or effect. Basically, our main focus is making sure that these builds are actually going to be capped on critical strike chance because they don't use Secrets of Suffering. So Spine Bow is the way to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the Spine Bow. Now, of course, we don't have access to synthesized items on Craft of Exile, but just imagine that it's synthesized with, you know, plus one arrow and projectile speed. So the first step is going to be to actually alteration spam the bow. And what we're going to be alteration spamming is either for T1 percent physical damage or T1 hybrid physical damage. So obviously I'm not going to do that because it would take a very long time. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the mod pool. So T1 physical damage, known as Merciless, has a weighting of 25, which is one of the rarest modifier in the game. And same thing for Dictators, which is T1 hybrid, which has a weighting of 25 as well. There's not really any real difference between T1% and T1 hybrid. However, if you intend to accept a single tier 2, if you look at tier 2 on the percent, it's 155 to 169, which is a pretty massive range and much lower than 179. However, if you look at T2 hybrid percent, it's 74 versus 79, which is actually not that big of a deal, and it's a range of 65 versus 74. So unless you know for a fact that you are 100% going to go for triple tier 1, it is pretty much always better to go for Merciless instead. So what we're going to do is we're going to alteration spam for Merciless, and then we're going to craft on the suffix Prefixes Cannot Be Changed. Now at that point, this is where the fun begins, and it's all about imprinting over and over and over again. So this is known as a Chrysochimeral, and it creates an imprint of your item, which is basically a save state. And at that point, what we're going to do is we're going to use Harvest with a Reforge plus Physical. And what we do is we Reforge Physical, and because we have Prefixes Cannot Be Changed, right, this Merciless modifier here is never going to go away. It's always going to be there. And the idea is we have to do this Reforge every single time. And if we don't hit what we want, we have to imprint it back, right? And then imprint it again, and then Reforge again, right? So this is exactly what we're going to do. So the way that you do this is you typically imprint like 50 imprints at a time, something like that. Now these currently go for about 0.6 exalts each, so it's pretty expensive because every single attempt is like 0.6 exalt, and the odds are abysmal, especially to hit hybrid tier 1. But let's just say that you do this, right? You do the Reforged Physical, and eventually you actually hit hybrid. Right, so let's go ahead and go to the mod pool prefixes, and let's just say that somehow you just get incredibly lucky and you hit hybrid. So at this point, you've got T1% and T1 hybrid. Now the next thing that you have to do is finish it off by getting the last of the prefix, which would be flat physical damage. Oh, sorry about that. I'm gonna go ahead and go on D&D, and the last one would be the flat. So the way that you do that is you have to augment. However, if you look at the prefixes and you look at physical, there's actually physical leech as life, and there's also physical leech as mana. Those both have the physical tag. So if you want to prevent hitting from physical leech and as life and physical leech as mana, you have to clear the suffixes, and you have to multimod, because for some reason you can actually benchcraft physical damage, leech as life, and mana as suffixes, and it's actually going to block the prefixes. So I'm going to go ahead and do exactly that. We're going to go ahead, and at this point, we're just going to remove one of the suffixes, and we're going to benchcraft the suffix Prefixes Cannot Be Changed, and we're going to scour it. Now, at that point, we're going to have both our prefixes and nothing else. So what we're going to be able to do at this point is multimod with the two leech that I was talking about, right? Leech is life and leech is mana, which are suffixes. And at this point, we've got three suffixes and two prefixes, and we have to augment. Now, there's two ways to go about it. There's the way which is a little bit more guaranteed, which is to actually augment, right? Because if you augment, since you've got these blocks already and you've got these blocks already, the only thing that you can get is flat Phys. That's it, right? So if I go to Harvest, right, and I do Augment Phys, the only thing that it's ever going to give me is flat Phys. It's impossible for it to give me anything else. Always, always, always going to be flat Phys. However, there's a bit of a cheaper method. Instead of doing Augment Phys, you can do non-Phys to Phys. Now, in this case, there is no prefix, right? All I have is this, this, and that. These are all modifiers which have the physical tag, except for the Multimod. Now, can have up to 3 crafted modifiers, does not have a physical tag, so we could actually do non-Phys to Phys. Now, however, there's also a physical suffix, which is damage with bleeding or something like that. So because of that, it's not guaranteed that it's going to add a prefix. So in our case here, when we have no prefix whatsoever, we should go with the Augment Phys. However, let's just say that we actually did have a prefix which is not physical on our prefix. So let's just say that we had, I don't know, like some flat cold damage to attacks. Now, because it has flat cold, which is not a physical tag, when we do non-Phys to Phys, it can hit the cold damage, and if it does hit the cold damage, it's guaranteed to turn it into physical damage flat, because it can't give us the suffix, which is a physical tag, because there's already got 3 suffixes. But if we do this, there's also a chance that it hits the suffix instead. The can have up to 3 crafted modifiers, and it gives us the damage with bleeding. At this point, that's okay, because we still have the block, we still have everything else, so we just have to do non-Phys to Phys again. Now, the odds are really bad. Put it this way. If you actually did Reforge physical and you actually get the T1 hybrid and you're going to try to augment the last flat, it's a 1 in 31. If I remember correctly. It's either 1 in 29 or 1 in 31. Let's see if I can find it. If he opens his, if Phodex opens up his thingy here, we'll actually go ahead and see it. Let's see. I think a little bit later on, earlier than that, he actually opened up his character sheet. Yeah, there we go. So it's a 1 in 31. If, on the other hand, you reforge physical and you actually hit the tier 1 flat physical damage, and you go for an augment on the physical damage to try to get the hybrid instead, it's a 1 in 151 for tier 1, or 1 in roughly 50 for tier 2, because it's 3 times easier to get. Instead of having a weighting of 25, it's a weighting of 50, right? So 3 times easier, essentially, because the tier 1 is essentially part of the tier 2, which is better, but weighting wise, it's a 1 in 50. Now, to get to the point when you imprint and you reforge, and it gives you flat tier 1, would take you not that many reforges. Somewhere around 40 to 50 reforges. However, that actually has a pretty good weighting, right? Looking at our flat damage, the weighting is, let's see, the weighting is, where is it? The weighting is 200. So it's about 40 to 50 reforges. So on average, to see T1 hybrid, which has a weighting of 25, it is 8 times worse. It is somewhere around 400 reforges on average to see tier 1 hybrid. 400. And then it's a 1 in 31. So if you do the math on that, right, it's 400 times 30, which is a total of 12,000 reforges, with a cost of 0.6 exalts per try, which is 7,200 exalts, which is absolutely insane, right? And that's if you go that route. The other route is to actually go with the opposite, which is augmenting the 151, and this time around, it's about a 1 in 40. To hit the flaring, right? And then followed by 151 augments at, well, the price is going to differ greatly, but anywhere between like 5 or 10x or something for the non-Phys to Phys method, to roughly 20x plus each for the actual Augment Phys. As you can see in this clip, he was about to pay 22x for an Augment Phys. So let's just call it 22x times 151. That's 3,000 exalts right there. And that's without counting the fact that you have to go through the 40 reforges, which is another 30 or so exalt every single attempt. So that would be 150 exalts, or 151 attempts, sorry, times 40 imprints, right? Because it's 40 imprints every single attempt, times 0.6 exalt every attempt. So as you can see, in this method, it's about 7,000 exalts, and in the previous method, it was about 7,000 exalts. So no matter how you look at it, it's ridiculously expensive. Now, we've done the math on it, and essentially to get to the point that we're at would cost around 7 mirrors. To get to the point where it'd be triple tier 1 instead, no matter if you hit the physical and you augment for the hybrid, or if you hit the hybrid, you augment for the physical, including the imprint cost, it would be around 20 mirrors. And that is just for the prefixes. So let's go ahead and move forward. Now let's just say that in a streak of luck, something happens. The skies bestows their crazy RNG upon you. I don't really know. And you actually end up with your 3 prefixes, which is kind of what happened to us. Then, well, the rest is just doing your suffixes, which is actually not that bad compared to the prefixes anyways. So what you have to do essentially at that point is craft on the bench craft, which is a suffix called prefixes cannot be changed. And then what you have to do is essentially do Reforge attack. And now this might sound familiar because the suffixes are the exact same thing that you have to do for the elemental version of this craft. So we're just going to go ahead and harvest, and we're going to do Reforge plus attack. And then you can kind of just do that over and over and over and over until you get +2 arrows. Now, the odds of getting +2 arrows when you do this is 1 in 260, which is about 520 exalts because it's 2 exalt per attempt. And this is not including the times where you're going to get 3 suffixes and you're going to have to do a Reforge keeping prefixes, which is an extra exalt as well. Now, this is not the only way to do this. There is another alternative instead. Another alternative, which is a little bit easier, if you will, is that instead of doing this until you get +2 arrows, you can do it until you get only +1 arrow. And when you get +1 arrow, you can once again lock in your prefixes with prefixes cannot be changed and do Reforge more likely. Now, this does not work on Craft of Exile because Craft of Exile is accounting for +1 arrow and +2 arrows to be different mod pools. However, in the actual game, +1 arrow and +2 arrows are in the same mod pool. They're just different tiers, the same way that 70 life and 80 life would be in the same mod pool, just another tier. But Craft of Exile looks at it as if it was a completely different modifier altogether, so it doesn't work. But in the game, when you do Reforge more likely, if you have an additional arrow, there's a 1 in 11 chance, if you do get the +1 arrow back, that it actually turns into +2 arrow. However, there's a bit of a caveat there. Every time you do Reforge more likely, there's basically a 100% chance that it's going to add an extra modifier. So, if I did more likely here, you'll see that every single time it's going to add another affix to my item. Like every single time it's going to add another affix to my item. And this is bad, right? This is actually quite bad. But if you actually get another affix which does not have the attack tag, like this, for example, right? This has an attack tag, but the cold resistance does not have an attack tag. You can actually benchcraft cannot roll attack modifiers and annul. And if you annul with cannot roll attack modifiers, since this, and that, these are all attack modifiers, it basically guarantees that you're going to get rid of the actual modifier which you don't care about. Unfortunately, this is not always possible because let's say you get attack speed or crit chance or any sort of a modifier that actually does have an attack tag alongside it. You can't use this cannot roll attack mod strategy. What you have to do is, prefixes cannot be changed and then annul for a 1 in 3 instead. Or a 1 in 2, I should say, instead. And then if you brick your +1 arrow, you have to go back to Reforge attacks until you get it again. And then eventually, you're going to get to the point where you have +1 arrow with nothing else. You do Reforge more likely. Eventually, it'll turn into +2 arrow. And eventually, it'll turn into +2 arrow alongside another suffix, which is not an attack, which you can get rid of. So let's just go ahead and remove all these modifiers and kind of cheat our way to that. So we're going to go into mod pool suffixes and we're going to add +2 arrows. Now, let's just say that you actually got to this point on your bow. Now comes the final part of the bow, which is the final two parts of the bow, which is essentially the ashling. So the first thing you're going to do at that point is multi-mod. Craft on can have up to 3 crafted mods, and prefixes cannot be changed. Now you might be wondering why we're going to craft this, and that's because when you ashling, it's going to remove a modifier, but if you have prefixes cannot be changed, it cannot actually pick a prefix. It can only pick a suffix. So the idea is that you want to have the can have up to 3 crafted modifiers because it acts as a third suffix, which means that when you do an ashling, it's going to have a 66% success rate instead of a 50% success rate of not removing your arrows, right? Because if you only had +2 arrows and prefixes cannot be changed and you did it, there's a 50-50. So this increases our odds to 66% success, which is really, really good because of the cost of getting +2 arrows is astronomical on this craft. Now, once you get to the point where you have +2 arrows and you successfully unveil, the next thing you want to do is you're going to want to craft a block so that when you unveil, you can remove any of the higher weights on the potential unveils. And that is basically going to be damage with charges. So we're going to go ahead and benchcraft the suffix either damage with power, frenzy, or endurance charges because either of the 3 is going to block all 3 of them. And then we are finally ready for the last step of this whole entire process, which is actually unveiling. And the thing is, even at this point, it's not guaranteed to succeed. So in this case, we got strength accuracy, which is bad, crit multi, which is bad, and double damage. Now, double damage was the best case scenario for my elemental bow. However, on a physical bow, since we don't go Secret Suffering, it needs to have crit. And every single bow needs to have attack speed. So, if it can't have both attack speed and crit, it's a brick. So, in this case, what we would have to do is make sure that when we unveil, since we don't get anything that we want, so in this case, we actually got lucky. We got the crit chance, which is the second best, and we got attack speed, which is technically the best, but because it's with Blood Rage, it's actually bad, so we wouldn't take that. So let's just go ahead and say that this crit chance wasn't there and it got another bad mod. What we're going to want to do is make sure that we pick a modifier which does not have an attack tag. And by picking a modifier which does not have an attack tag on the unveil, we can go back to this trick which I previously mentioned, where we craft on cannot roll attack modifiers. And by crafting the cannot roll attack modifiers, since the unveil doesn't have an attack mod, it is once again going to guarantee that as long as you don't hit the cannot roll attack modifiers to remove the unveil, and then we can go ahead and multi-mod again and ashling again, right? And in this case, we got pretty lucky. We didn't remove our +2 arrows, so we can remove this multi-mod. We can go back to crafting on the damage per charges, and we can essentially unveil again. Now, in this case, as you can see, we got crit multi, which is bad, trigger, which is bad, and attack speed when a rare or unique enemy is nearby, which is bad, right? So all these are bad, so we're going to take one which is not an attack modifier, and we're going to do the exact same thing. Remove this. Now we can easily remove it, right? There's a 100% success rate here. We just have to craft on cannot roll attack modifiers and Annul. And as you can see, sometimes it's going to remove the cannot roll attack modifiers, but that's just one exalt, which is trivial compared to getting the +2 arrows back. So we're just going to go ahead and remove it. And then again, we're just going to do the same thing. Cannot roll attack modifiers, prefixes cannot be changed, and then ashling. But here's the thing. Eventually, it's a 1 in 3 chance, but it's going to remove, wow, surviving a lot. Eventually, it's going to remove the +2 arrows. And at that point, it's a devastating blow. You have to essentially redo the entirety of the suffixes, and getting to the point where you have a usable +2 arrow that is ready to be unveiled will cost you on average anywhere between 600 to 900 exalts, which is an average about 750 exalts just to get to this point where you can unveil. And when you unveil and you miss, and you have to unveil again, there's a 66% chance that you'll have to go back to needing to spend another 750 exalts, which is why a craft like this is one that I would absolutely not recommend, but I still think that a video like this can be helpful to people who are trying to learn, and also just to the people who are wondering, how the hell was this ever created? Well, now you know exactly the step-by-step guide, and you also got a bit of a bonus side story as to how this bow came to be. So, As always, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Before I go, I do want to say a huge shout out to my supporters: Rescroll, Brandon, Welcome Back, Thomas Mass, Nate, The Great Master, Alex, Tim, Mercury, Johnny, Nalvgar, Solomonk, Exo, Gio Costa, and Bitizen, as well as anybody else who has supported me in the past and anyone else who wishes to remain anonymous. Again, hopefully you guys enjoyed, hopefully you learned a little something, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.